What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, May 31st, 2017, last day of May. Tomorrow's the first day of June. My, how time flies when you're trying to stop a world war. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Quick little program reminder, this next Monday, Gilad Atzmon will be our third-hour guest talking about his recent concert tour. Fabulous jazz musician, his lecture series on identity politics, talking about his new book, which I have unfortunately misplaced, so I can't. Oh, there it is. Being in Time. It's a very good book. It's now available for sale. So we'll be talking about all of that kind of stuff. All right, getting on into the news. The Seth Rich story is not going away despite the best efforts of the corporate media and the Democrats and Hillary trying to ridicule it, dismiss it, say there's nothing there. Even Snopes is on board saying, oh, this is tinfoil hat, wingnut conspiracy wacko time. And, of course, it's getting a tremendous amount of coverage on the independent media. It's getting a tremendous amount of coverage in the foreign media. And it seems it's only the U.S. corporate media that is really trying to pretend that there's no story here. But, again, you need to get on back to the Seth Rich story. Seth Rich being the leak, the source of the DNC emails leaked to WikiLeaks, completely exposes the corporate media and the Democratic Party and the Hillary campaign for lying to you for month after month about Russia hacked the DNC servers. And there is zero evidence for it. Noam Chomsky came out with an article today saying that the whole world knows this is just a Russiagate, it's just a made-up piece of fluff, and they're all laughing at us for the sheer utter nonsense that is going on about this. But the Democrats, corporate media, Hillary's campaign, they basically bet the farm on selling you that evil Russia hacked their servers. And it was all based on one claim by this one company hired by the DNC, who have now backed off and said, no, we didn't find anything at all. And meanwhile, of course, the FBI never got to look at the DNC servers to do a forensic analysis. CIA didn't. NSA didn't. Nobody got to look. Nobody got to look. It was all just, take our word for it, it's the Russians. And that's a tall order in the aftermath of whoppers like Saddam's nuclear weapons and Assad's sarin gas and so forth and so on. So a lot of people are still paying attention to this. And they're out, on the other side, they're still screaming, oh, it was the Russians, it was the Russians, it was the Russians. So we ran a little poll on whatreallyhappened.com today. Who gave the DNC emails to WikiLeaks? Russia got just 2%. Seth Rich got 98%. So at this point, the public opinion is very much in line with the available evidence, and they're not buying into the propaganda anymore. Noam Chomsky, speaking of Noam Chomsky, had a BBC interview, and he came out and just said flat out, Bernie Sanders would have won the Democratic nomination last year if it hadn't been for the shenanigans of the party managers, and that is absolutely true. It almost seems like every 3 or 4 days there's another revelation of detected vote fraud last year, all of it favoring Hillary Clinton. We now know that one of the issues surrounding Seth Rich was some shenanigans with duplicate voting locations that were used to harvest Hillary ballots and then substitute them from Bernie ballots at the real official polling places. This is coming from Seth Rich's girlfriend. And it may have been that during the primaries, that may have been what motivated Seth Rich to say, I got to do something about this, and he started grabbing the emails and walking them out of the DNC headquarters, probably on flash drives. He wouldn't have used the net. Now, the good news is that the sponsors who walked out on Sean Hannity's show over his shocking claim that Seth Rich was the DNC leaker, they are now coming on back. They're reading the popular opinion. They're seeing which way the wind is blowing, and the wind is basically blowing towards Seth Rich was the DNC leak. And they're starting to come back to Hannity's show. USAA is now back. They're coming back on board. And so that's good news for Sean Hannity, because he's one of the few people in the corporate media who's trying to deal with this story on a factual basis. Now, interestingly enough, Senator Doug Collins has called James Comey on his allowing Hillary to skate on Title 18 felony violations by saying she did not intend to do wrong, by pointing out cases where there were military people, Marines and servicemen, accidentally revealed classified documents they did not intend to do wrong, and they actually did a lot less than Hillary, and still they got prosecuted. And so Senator Collins is saying, why the double standard? Why the selective enforcement? Now, everybody's talking about how James Comey is going to testify next week publicly, and already the word is he's going to go on out there and say, oh, yes, Donald Trump interfered with the investigation, even though he testified under oath that no such interference had actually happened after the period of time when it is now being claimed Trump tried to interfere. So we're back to the same old model of the U.S. government and the corporate media. If at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again. And I'm hoping that the Congressional Committee is going to turn to Comey and say, do you have any documentation about this, or is it just your word? And, of course, Comey's going to pop up and say, well, I'm the former FBI director. Of course you will take my word. Actually, being the former director of the FBI is a good reason not to take anybody's word about anything. We're going to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And, again, you need to go back and look at the real history of the FBI. Not the wonderful people who are portrayed on TV shows and feature films like Silence of the Lambs. I'm talking about going back and studying the history of COINTELPRO, studying the history of the framing of James Earl Ray. Because there's a lot of material out there that shows what the FBI is really all about. Now, there is another issue that is coming on up, and this is about Carter Page. Now, Carter Page was the American oil industry consultant, and he was briefly associated with Donald Trump's presidential campaign he was briefly a foreign policy advisor, and he basically was the focus of the acquisition of the FISA warrant that was used to try and retroactively legalize the illegal spying on Trump's campaign. And now Carter Page is out there saying that everything that was said about him to get that FISA warrant was not only absolutely false, it was highly damaging to his reputation. And now he wants to try and testify before Congress about how that happened. So to nobody's surprise, the Democrats are now demanding that Carter Page's testimony be put on indefinite hold. They don't want him getting up there talking. They do not want him talking. The request of Democrats postponed indefinitely. And by the way, that's not the only strange situation about witnesses. That whole Russiagate invasion being run by Muniz, they haven't interviewed a single witness. All they're doing is rehashing the rumors and innuendo in that already discredited dossier from Moscow. And the corporate media is still trying to be loyal, and it is beginning to cost them. Now, a lot of people have commented here on the show that Fox News has all of a sudden started shifting back toward the left. They're becoming just another CNN, MSNBC, and they are starting to pay the price because they're losing advertiser demographics to MSNBC this month. They're falling behind CNN and MSNBC in the ratings. Now, Fox is trying to blame that it was all because of the loss of Bill O'Reilly, but no. If Fox News is not out there serving as a balance and check on the liberally biased media, then people are just going to tune them out. Now, as for Bill O'Reilly, I guess he's decided that he's not planning on coming back to the corporate media anytime soon because he's now out there starting to say what's really been going on in the corporate media. He did an interview over at Breitbart, and he was basically saying that all of this talk about a crisis in the White House, it was all made up by the corporate media. They're just out there trying to run any story that makes it look like the Trump White House is in chaos, that it's in trouble, that Trump can't effectively govern. This is Bill O'Reilly who's now out there saying this is what's been going on. And there's a lot of shakeups going on in the corporate media. Scott Pelley is now out at the CBS Evening News. He was the anchor, and now apparently, according to CNN Money, he is being shown the door. Now, over the last few days, a lot of people were very upset over Kathy Griffin, who claims to be a comedian, although I personally did not find her that funny. But she toes the liberal agenda, and she gets a lot of work, or should I say past tense, got a lot of work, because she came out with this photo holding a bloody head, ISIS style, and the head was made to look like Donald Trump, which is definitely crossing a line. And there was a huge backlash from both sides of the aisle. Liberals are appalled by what she did. Conservatives are appalled by what she did. CNN has now announced they've terminated Kathy Griffin, who normally co-hosts their New Year's show and does some segments. That was followed up with the MGM Resorts saying that Kathy Griffin will not be doing her stand-up comedy routine at any of their resorts anytime in the near future. So the backlash is really hitting her. Plus, she's got the Secret Service now down on her for having done that photo. And it was tasteless. And yes, there's a First Amendment, but sometimes with the freedom of the First Amendment, you have to have a sense of responsibility over what you're doing. There have to be guidelines, ethics, and morals. Here at whatreallyhappened.com, we never encourage violence. We don't suggest it. We don't go into personal attacks against the people we don't like. And the families are definitely off limits. Those are rules that keep us focused on the fact-based news that you all need to have to make those good choices. And what we're seeing over on the liberal side, because they don't really have anything they can get Trump for, there's no evidence of the Russian collusion. So all they've got are personal attacks and smears, and that's what led Kathy Griffin into making this serious career misstep. Now, speaking of the corporate media not having really learned their lessons, as you know, there was an unfortunate incident where Tiger Woods got arrested on a DUI. There's going to be some clarification about that shortly. But apparently when ESPN, which has a very cozy relationship with Tiger Woods, when they ran the story, they photoshopped his mugshot to put him against a much more pleasing background without all the little lines that say how tall he is, and they smoothed over his very ruffled hair. And it's a minor thing, but it's another illustration that the corporate media likes to fool around with the stories. Now, with regard to Tiger Woods, he was arrested for the DUI because he refused a breathalyzer, and the police were saying he was acting belligerent, but he was released on his own recognizance, and the last word we have is there was no alcohol in his system. They did force him to take a blood alcohol test. It came back 0. Apparently, what Tiger Woods is saying, that he had a mix of medications that he was under that made him drive like a dangerous maniac and then behave with belligerence toward the police officer. And we know how certain prescription psychiatric medications, antidepressants, can trigger very bizarre behavior. So on this one, I'm willing to give Tiger Woods the benefit of the doubt, knowing what I know about these medications. So I just wanted to throw that in there because they say, oh, DUI, and it's going to tarnish his reputation. At this point, it doesn't look like it was. And hopefully Tiger Woods will be back to doing what Tiger Woods does here. Getting on to the international news here, Trump is ramping up his criticism of Germany, and Angela Merkel is still out there saying that her country, Germany, needs to adopt a more independent stance in world affairs. So we're starting to see these hints coming out of Angela Merkel that Germany is starting to strain at that European Union leash the way Great Britain did, and we're hearing so many of those other countries, they really would rather be out of the EU. Now, the big news today is there was a major explosion in Kabul, Afghanistan, supposedly in what is considered a safe area. It was a car bomb. They're claiming it was a suicide bomb, although we don't know if the car was set off by remote control. But it killed at least 80 people, wounding more than 300. That was a really huge amount of explosives. And somebody's trying to make a point over there. Meanwhile, the U.S. Air Force has tripled the number of airstrikes across Afghanistan since last year, trying to get it back under control. They really have not taken complete control of Afghanistan. They've got 8,000 U.S. troops on the ground in Afghanistan, and they still cannot get it under control, which is why they call Afghanistan the graveyard of empires. Now, the U.S. and its puppet regime are in control of what are considered the more important areas of Afghanistan. the oil pipeline right-of-way, and those poppy fields. But getting on over to the eastern part, the mountainous part, it's very, very difficult. And they still have not won in Afghanistan. In fact, it looks like they're losing. Getting on down to Syria, things are still ramping up over there. The Syrian army is advancing in Deir ez-Zor against the ISIS forces. Meanwhile, the U.S. is now arming the Syrian militants on the border with Iraq to block the popular forces from taking control of that border. There's a big fight coming up over that border because remember, that border between Syria and Iraq, that area on both sides is where the U.S. wants to carve out the future Kurdistan. The United Nations is warning that the protracted war in Yemen has led to social, economic, and institutional collapse. They're saying urgent action is required. Yemen is in the midst of a humanitarian crisis. They've got 7 million people on the brink of famine. They also have this outbreak of cholera that's killed 500 people so far. The United Nations is expecting 150,000 cases in the next 6 months. I'll tell you the urgent action that needs to be done first. Stop the war. Just stop all these wars. All the suffering we're hearing about, humanitarian crisis, starvation, famine, are all the result of all these wars taking place across the face of the globe. Now, yesterday we were talking about this little bit of a whoopsie or upset over in South Korea because the newly elected president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, was apparently surprised to find out the U.S. had installed 4 additional terminal high-altitude area defense missile systems. And he wanted to know just how that came about, where he was the last one to know. And South Korea's investigation has found out that apparently South Korea's military brass knew about it and deliberately kept him in the dark. So now Moon Jae-in is facing the fact that his own military is going rogue and working with the U.S. government. I imagine there are about to be some demotions and terminations over this, because allowing more arms into South Korea was definitely not on the new president's agenda. He wants the arms to get out. He wants the U.S. to get out. He's already talking about a summit with Kim Jong-un to try and get reunification back on track. Now, a lot of stuff is happening over in Egypt. You know, there was the bombing of the Coptic Christians. There's been some retaliations. And apparently Egypt is deciding that they need to sort of take firmer control of what the people know. And so they're starting to block more newspapers and websites, imposing a media blackout. And apparently Egypt has blocked access to a number of news websites, including Al Jazeera and Huffington Post Arabic. And this is following similar actions by its Gulf allies Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. So we're seeing all these nations descend under a silicon curtain. If you're my age, you remember the Iron Curtain. Well, it's the silicon curtain. We have way too many governments around the world who understand that their populations are waking up to just how much governments lie to people, to trick them out of their money, their obedience, and life and limb of their children. And it has become a problem for governments. When they lose that ability to lie to their people effectively and with impunity, they lose control. And keeping control is always the #1 priority of any ruling body. Everything else is subordinate to maintaining control. Up in Norway, their equivalent to the CIA is pushing a plan to unleash Facebook police. They want to make sure that Facebook is politically correct and doctrinally correct. So we're starting to see the ugly head of censorship rear over the global internet. It's a little late, but it's starting to happen. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go ahead and grab a phone call. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. So I heard you talking about it. I think you're absolutely correct about what's going on in the Philippines right now with Duterte and him starting to chart a more independent course. And I think the ISIS activity is exactly the blueprint of us trying to overthrow him, or at least threatening to overthrow him. But what I also want to discuss that in the same vein, that China, with its burgeoning economy and the gravitational pull that it's both its growing economy and its growing military is exerting versus our shrinking economic influence and our shrinking military influence. We've got to hold this empire together. We can't allow Duterte to go, but we also, I think Korea is actually the linchpin, because if Korea goes, Mike, and if there's a détente between North and South Korea, then if there's no need for U.S. troops, of course they'll want us out, as you're just talking about with the THAAD. And then China will be the preeminent influence, great power influence over Korea. And then without the threat of North Korea, then Japan will follow suit and be pulled into China's orbit as well. And it may be even Australia and New Zealand, which leaves only an alliance with India to carry the balance for us.
I agree, and that's why I'm expecting they're either going to try and assassinate South Korea's president and get somebody more militant in there, or the U.S. is going to stage a false flag and say, oh my goodness, North Korea sank the Ronald Reagan, the war is on, because you're absolutely right. We're seeing the United States is a failing empire. It's failing economically. It's looking more and more like our military is more illusion than substance, and that the invincibility of the American military forces may be more of a myth. I mean, we saw how that cruise missile attack Trump sent in to Syria, most of those cruise missiles missed their actual target. The Moab bomb turned out to not be as powerful as they were saying. Yesterday they were celebrating this tremendous success of the ICBM interceptor, and the reason they were celebrating is because they've had such a long string of failures. Plus, we know about all the problems with the Zumwalt destroyer, the Gerald R. Ford, the F-22, the F-35, the littoral combat ships. It's more like our military is more of a presentation, long on impressive-looking machinery and very short on actual performance. And I'll tell you, one of the things right now that we have, if the U.S. gets into a major fight with somebody who's really capable of fighting back, and they suffer a major loss, that's going to be the beginning of the end, because it turned out the Soviet Union's military might was more illusion than substance, and when they lost in Afghanistan, that was the end of the myth of the invincible Soviet military, and it all began falling apart after that, and the U.S. is in kind of the same position right now.
You know, Mike, I saw something curious, and I may have seen it on What Really Happened, but where the United States Army is taking pre-positioned combat equipment that we had for rapid, aerial reinforcement, and they just hop in these units that are already unit sets that you just drive off. They're drawing down the stocks in South Korea to create a 16th. We have 15 maneuver brigades right now, to make a 16th for whatever it is. But whatever it is, it's not going to be in Korea. And I'm wondering what that means. I looked at that and I'm going, well, I mean, how afraid can they be if they're drawing down those stocks? I mean, of North Korea. I think obviously you've talked about that many times. There's really nothing to fear. But it may be a tacit admission that maybe we're not going to be there very long with the THAAD thing, and then your old analogy of the Roman legions in Germania and all that stuff.
Yep.
That but it's curious that happened. Did I see that on What Really Happened? I think it was out of the Army Times.
Yeah, I think we ran that story here, but what is really significant, well, tell you what, stay on the line, Peter. We're going to come back to this right after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Peter in Los Angeles. And, Peter, I think there's another aspect about how the U.S. forces are now starting to take equipment out of these pre-positioned stockpiles, if you were, and the U.S. has these set up all over the world, pre-positioned military assets, so all they have to do is fly the troops in, the troops hop into the vehicles, and they roll off and they kill a bunch of people. The fact that they're starting to go on in and take resources from these, I think, indicates that overall U.S. military stockpiles are starting to run low. There was an article that came out a couple of weeks ago saying that Donald Trump is dropping so many bombs he's running out of bombs, which of course meant more money going to the military contractors and their stocks went up. But I think the problem may be more serious than they're letting on, because if you go back to when General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on this whole period of conquest of the Middle East, it was all supposed to end with the conquest of Iran in 2008. And obviously, this being 2017, they've gone much longer and had to use up much more material than they were originally planning. As we mentioned earlier in the show, they're still in Afghanistan trying to win there. They're bogged down in Iraq. They're still bogged down in Syria, Libya, Yemen. And I think the reality is that they're starting to run out of key materials. They're going through them faster than they can be replaced, and that's why they're starting to strip these pre-positioned brigades, if you will.
You know, Mike, another crying, need is that we've, you keep reading these stories about how the Army and the Marine Corps have lost, billions of dollars worth of small arms and equipment and so on, which it's really not a loss. It's being transferred to the terrorists.
Yes.
And now we're in Syria, especially, where it's reaching the point where it's taking massive infusions, and a new Kurdish army that maybe we need it there. But I can remember speaking with you a while way back, saying even the beginning, back in 2003, back in 2005 or something, that the United States military was having to buy billions of rounds of ammunition, 5.56 ammunition, from Brazil and Taiwan and Israel, because our manufacturing capability, even in a really low-intensity war where barely anybody was shooting back, of course, except our terrorists, I guess they shoot a lot, but we couldn't sustain even small arms ammunition manufacture. That's how bad it was.
Well, after all the gun grabbers attack on the gun industry and trying to put these companies out of business, and all of a sudden the U.S. Army needs them, and they didn't have enough time to rebuild that capability, so that's why they had to go to these other countries and buy up all this ammunition. And they did buy a huge amount of ammunition. They were also buying .223, and a lot of gun rights advocates were wondering if the government was trying to disarm the American people simply by buying up all the ammunition. Right. But as it turns out, they were building up in advance for all of these wars of conquest, but they've gone through it all. Anybody who's served on the front line is going to tell you the supplies they go right through your hands like running water, and there's a lot of genuine loss along with this transfer to the terrorists. But it feels to me if they're starting to hit these pre-positioned combat units, that tells me that overall, the U.S. military stockpiles are starting to run low, and that is a serious, serious crisis.
Yeah, it really is, Mike. Hey, I know you got other callers. Thanks very much, Guy.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Laura in Michigan. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Last week you were talking about the Sarnoff brothers, that friend of theirs that was questioned by the FBI.
Yes.
And got shot.
Yes.
I'm going to tell you a story. James Nichols and I were at a farm meeting, so he told me the story. After the Oklahoma bombing, of course, the FBI came to his house, the brother's house, yes. James, and, swarmed the whole house and everything and got whatever guns and whatever. And then James they said, is this all the guns in the house? And James said, no, I have a gun up in my bedroom under my pillow. And they said, go ahead and go get it. And James told me, he said, I started up the stairs. I went 3 or 4 stairs, and I thought, wait a minute. Yeah. I come down these stairs with that gun, and they're going to blast me.
Yep.
He turned around and he said, you guys get the gun yourself. And that's exactly what they're going to do. They're so sure he was involved with Oklahoma that they were going to blast him, That just shows you got to be very careful. If the FBI comes to your house to question you, be very careful not to do. Because wasn't there a deal with those Zarnow brothers? Something about a decorative knife or sword or something on the wall?
Yes.
So I wouldn't be surprised they didn't do the same kind of trip and say, hey, show us that sword that you got there. And then they had an excuse to shoot him.
Well, again, go back and study the history of COINTELPRO and certainly the history of the Oklahoma City bombing, where they were trying to craft a cover story. The FBI are not the good guys. They are America's equivalent of the Gestapo. They exist to enforce the will of the rulers and not much of anything else.
Do you want to update on Terry?
Yes.
Terry Nichols?
Yes.
You know, he's been in prison 27 years, I think it is.
Yes.
For most of the time, he was in solitary, couldn't talk to anybody. The guards started talking to him. The guards liked him. And the warden said, no more talking to Terry. Now, just now, after all these years, they're starting to let him out in general population so he can actually talk to people. He's been painting landscapes. So the prison, you know, the wonderful people they are, they're going to let him paint murals on the prison walls.
Oh, that's good.
So that's what's going on with him. I'm trying to work on one of his relatives to call into John's show and kind of, you know, talk about him and everything. I have a good friend who's been writing to him ever since he's been in prison. He writes these huge, long letters. I guess you got all kinds of time, you know.
Yes, I can imagine.
So that's all he can really do.
All right. Well,
so anyway, that's just kind of a little update on Terry.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the update. And Terry, unfortunately, is one of these people who are kept in prison because they're an embarrassment to the government, like Mumia Al-Jabbar and Leonard Peltier. And these are people who apparently have not done anything wrong, but the government needed a patsy to say, oh, these people are bad and we've solved the crime. Again, going back, looking at Bruno Richard Hauptmann, who was executed for the kidnapping and death of the Lindbergh baby, and then years later it came on out, he'd been framed, he'd been railroaded, and the FBI was involved in that. So that's the reality that we're all living under. Laura, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch to Steve in California. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, a couple of days ago, I caught an interview with Amy Goodman with Noam Chomsky. It was recent. I can't remember how many months back. And it was an interesting interview in that Noam Chomsky mentioned Moab, the mother of all bombs, and the Syrian missile crisis, and that there really was no objective to it other than boosting the approval rating and making the appearance that Donald Trump was a very strong president, a very strong man. It had nothing more to do with that other than right there, just an image booster, basically, is what he said. I agree with that. I agree with that comment.
Okay. Well, Chomsky says a lot of really good things, and like I said, we linked to one of his articles or one of his interviews today, where he basically says the whole world knows this Russia hacked the DNC server is a fake news, and the world is basically laughing at us because we're not standing up and denouncing our corporate media for lying to us like this. Of course, obviously, the rest of the world is apparently unaware of the independent media because we're certainly standing up and pointing the finger of ridicule at the corporate media. Because again, the story doesn't make any sense. And the corporate media has been in the business of spinning fairy tales for so long, it almost seems like they've actually forgotten how to report real news. And maybe that's why they can't change.
He did mention in his interview there was a pretty long interview, that the chemical attack, it made no sense, 0 sense of why Bashar al-Assad would do such a thing when he was winning the war. He did admit that, but then it was interesting that he did refer to Bashar al-Assad as a cruel dictator. I was kind of puzzled by saying that he didn't do these things. It made no sense that he would attack his own people, the support of his own people, by doing such a terrible thing, but then later on referred to him as a cruel, evil dictator. I was kind of puzzled by that comment.
Well, Noam Chomsky is probably still too dependent on the corporate media point of view, or he's got allegiances that basically say this is what you're going to push. But it was good that he came on out there, and maybe it was trying to maintain his own credibility by saying, yeah, this story is just too ridiculous to try and sell to the American people. So we're going to say, yeah, it was a bogus story, but he's still a cruel, evil dictator and needs to be removed. And it would almost seem like now they're in a position of having to adjust the propaganda, throw out a trial balloon. Is this going to work? No. Well, then we'll pull back and we'll try something else. But again, all those conflicting trial balloons are why the propaganda campaign is failing miserably, because for propaganda to work, it has to present a coherent, believable, alternative reality to place in front of the real world. And when you have all your propaganda being created by ad agencies and public relations firms, there's no narrative, there's no continuity, and that's why it's not as effective.
Well put. I couldn't say it better. That's great. Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Now, getting on back to the news. Down in Israel, Israel has just cut vital services to 140,000 Palestinians in Jerusalem Al-Quds. They're cutting off water and other vital services to two crowded districts of East Jerusalem, which are in the occupied West Bank. The sanitation conditions are already severely deteriorated. Israel's point of view is they're not responsible for those districts. What looks like is they just want the people to leave so Jerusalem, or rather Israel, can come on back in. Now, a big problem for Donald Trump. As you know, he still is holding out hope for some kind of a peace deal between Israel and Palestine. Every president coming into office sees as one of the great things they could accomplish for their legacy is final peace between Israel and Palestine, and of course it never happens because that's not what Israel wants. But apparently Trump is under a great deal of pressure to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and move the embassy there. And earlier on it said he was going to do it, then he said he wasn't going to do it. Israel certainly wants it to happen. There's only one problem. Every single president for the past 22 years has been pressured to move to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and they don't because it would preempt the Oslo Accords and negate Washington's presumed role as an honest broker in the region. If Trump were to move the embassy to Jerusalem and say, we recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, it is the end of any pretense the United States has of being an impartial arbiter in the Middle East, not that anybody believes they are anymore anyway, especially since 9/11. Now, apparently yesterday, following Memorial Day, there was a group of anti-war protesters, consisting primarily of Veterans for Peace, who confronted President Trump about the endless wars. And they're out there saying it has to stop. This was being led by the president of Veterans for Peace, Barry Lindendorf, saying it has to stop. What are these wars accomplishing? How are they making the United States better? They certainly are destroying the United States image around the world of being some kind of human rights advocate or benevolent overseer of the planet. And what's really alarming is Donald Trump himself, in discussing foreign policy, seems to have moved away from this idea that we are really doing this for the betterment of all planet Earth. And he's simply back to saying, we're going to take over this place, and we're going to take over this place, and we're going to take over this place. You know, today, Syria, tomorrow, the world, and so forth, which is kind of alarming there. All right, another phone call. Dan in Washington, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks for taking the call. I want to comment on Noam Chomsky. Some of my parents were a fan of his, and I've just never respected his opinion because I think he's Jewish, but he'll blame everything on the military-industrial complex, and then sometimes he'll talk about Zionism. He'll never talk about Jewish influence, like on American media or our government or these types of things. So, and it's very similar to Amy Goodman, where I just feel like they're hypocrites because they just kind of blame, they distort the facts and distract from basically Jewish power in America, and they're kind of.
Well,
to me, I don't trust them at all.
Again, I want to be cautious about painting with too wide a brush. I mean, Noam Chomsky is certainly not being inaccurate when he talks about the huge drain on the nation's gross domestic product by the military-industrial complex. Again, his insights into the global perception of the Seth Rich case and the DNC hacking case is accurate. And we need to be really, really careful, again, that I really resist using the words Jew or Jewish, because when I criticize the government of Israel, I'm going to say we're criticizing the government of Israel and these few individuals. And I don't want to get on to a situation of saying the Jews do this. I don't want to get into a situation of saying the blacks are all doing this, or I'm going to say the Hispanics are all doing that. That's when you get into some very reckless kind of reporting, and it's bad journalism to be doing that. Now, again, anybody in front of a microphone or in front of a camera is coming into the situation with their own preconceptions and biases. You can't eliminate it. I mean, I've got mine coming on in there. So I think what you need to do for any of these people, whether it's Amy Goodman or Noam Chomsky or Michael Rivero or John Stedmiller, is you take what they say on a case-by-case basis and evaluate it for yourself. And some of it's going to be good, and you're going to say, I agree with that, and some of it you're going to say, I don't agree with that. And that is really the most rational way of dealing with what you're seeing coming out of any form of media.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I mean, but I mean, it's like, I guess you could say Jewish mafia as far as the media in America. I mean, people say it's the corporate media.
I say it's the corporate media, and yes, there's a disproportionate number of people of the Jewish faith in there. But again, I have to come on back and say, when I worked in Hollywood, I knew a lot of Jewish people who were just wonderful. And that's another reason, you know, especially Renee Valenti. She was like my second mother. And so that's why I don't want to paint with a brush Jewish this, Jewish that. It's not fair, no matter who you do it to. It's not fair to the Muslims. It's not fair to the blacks. Let's talk about individuals who are doing bad things. Got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phones here. Mike in Alaska. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I had a question. I was wondering if Hawaii bans you from having any kind of cryptocurrency, or what happened down there with that?
It was a specific cryptocurrency. I'd been approached by them about learning how to use their wallet. I'm way behind the curve on cryptocurrency. I will admit it. I'm late to the game on that. And I can't even remember the name of the specific cryptocurrency. It wasn't Bitcoin. It was one of the other new ones. And we were just getting started, and I had a wallet, and there was some of these crypto coins in there, and then all of a sudden Hawaii passed a law. Apparently they decided that this particular system was fraudulent, and they basically banned it in Hawaii. So I just basically shut down, and that was the last of that. I don't know if it's banned anywhere else, and I don't even know if it's maybe because our legislators don't understand cryptocurrency, but that was my one and only foray into cryptocurrency.
Okay. I'll send you an email. The only reason I brought it up is I think that, you know, you can find one that you can have, and then I think you can get quite a few donations that way. I would definitely. I was looking for that on your site. But, Mike, I wanted to ask you one thing. I'm thinking that this Trump stuff has a lot to do with what happened in the 60s with the Immigration Act. And I was looking through your website on that, and I was coming back into the country through immigration, through customs the other day, and it got me thinking about that, you know, we've added 80 million new people at a rate of over 1 million a year since, I think it's 65. And I think this explains the Trump thing much more than, I like what you have on the wars and the, you know, bankers' wars and things like that, but we got a lot of people, and a lot of them don't get along even with one another. And I travel all over, and I see it all the time. And I just, there's many, many countries, especially in Asia, where you can't become that place. You cannot become, you or I cannot become, for example, Taiwanese.
Yes.
So, but everyone can come here. And then, you know, I didn't used to think about it, but then when I travel, I see it. And then I see that, you know, that group doesn't get along with this group. Well, guess what? They're both in Hawaii, for example. That to me, that's crazy.
Well, see, here's the thing. Our Polynesian makeup goes back for generations, all the way back to the plantation era, when the missionaries and whalers brought measles to the island and just decimated the indigenous population, and a lot of the other native Hawaiians decided they wanted to see the rest of the world. So they would sign up to serve as crew on the whaling ships and cargo ships. And so the plantation owners literally brought in workers from the Philippines and China and Japan. And so our multiracial society has been multiracial for a number of generations. And so there isn't a lot of discrimination. Everybody's a minority here, and we all get along just fine. Anyway, Mike, got to let you go. Got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're going to grab one more phone call, then we're going to do some news here. Fred in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. You brought up John Stadtmiller relative to Dan in Washington. A couple of weeks ago, John gave a recitation on all the entities surrounding Donald and his administration. Mm-hmm. And I think I brought up when I called last week, Henry Makow, M-A-K-O-W, Henry
yes.
Makow. And I gave you a citation from 21 August of last year, 21 August, at henrymakow.com. And he featured an article entitled Is Shabbat, that's or Shabbat Lubavitch. And by the way, David Duke, right?
Yes.
David Duke, I happened to catch one of his presentations recently, and he focused on Shabbat Lubavitch because Kushner is a Shabbat Lubavitch member.
Okay.
And by the way, he and Ivanka spent the entire afternoon and night at the tomb of Menachem Mendel Schneerson. And
where are you going with this?
Yeah, good question. You were saying we don't want to paint with a broad stroke, right? We want to be specific, because I agree with you. Some of my best friends when I was a paper boy were children of my Jewish paper customers. Okay, what Henry Makow does and others like David Duke is they focus on the really hardcore criminals. And in Henry Makow's article, Is Shabbat a Criminal Racist Terrorist Organization? He presents the evidentiary proof that it is.
Yes.
And Mike, there is this law that was enacted 20th of March of 91 with H.W. Bush as president, and it's called Education Day. And Menachem Mendel Schneerson and the Shabbat Lubavitch folks, and I think Henry Makow has this at that 21 August 16, installment. It's all about Noahide laws. Education Day in honor of Menachem Mendel Schneerson is Education Day about Noahide laws. And what it is, Mike, is the Noahide laws are directly derived from the Talmud, and the very first one is not to worship, false idols. And according to Shabbat and other entities like that, anyone who worships any god other than the god of Shabbat or Judaism, which is Lucifer, Baphomet.
Well, wait a minute. Okay, this is. First of all, this is going on way too long, and second of all, you need to remember my first wife was Jewish, and the fact of the matter is that the God that is worshipped by the Jews is the same exact God that's worshipped by the Christians, the same exact God that's worshipped by the Muslims, goes all the way back to Abraham and the creation of monotheism. And so when you're coming on out there, Mike, I'm sorry, Fred, we're going to let you go here. I was hoping that he was going to make a point here. I think when we're talking about Jared Kushner, let's talk about whether he was in fact trying to, or was being offered a deal to alter Trump's policy on Russian sanctions in exchange for financing. That's a legitimate news story. Where he and Ivanka went when they were on tour in Israel is irrelevant. Okay? All right, we're going to do some news stories here. Down in the Philippines, as you know, all of a sudden ISIS is working to bring down President Duterte. And all of this goes back to when Duterte said the drug problem in the Philippines is out of control, and he cracked down on them, including death sentences for drug dealers. And remember when Obama went down there and said, no, don't interfere with the drug dealers. You have to treat them gently the way we do in the United States of America. That's what works best, really, at least from our point of view. And Duterte said no, and he's cracked down on the drug trade inside the Philippines. And now all of a sudden he's being demonized in the corporate media. ISIS is all of a sudden showing up to try and take over his country. And even Chelsea Clinton went down and chastised Duterte over a joke about soldiers raping women, at which point Duterte replied back to her, "What was your reaction when your father was messing around with Monica Lewinsky?" So what this is all about, again, is preserving the drug trade for U.S. government interests like the CIA. That's what is driving all of this. We are living in a narcocracy. Go back and study the history of prohibition. When they made alcohol illegal, all of a sudden there were huge sums of money pouring into the hands of the gangsters, and they literally reshaped American politics to suit themselves. And then finally, when they were entrenched as the new political elite, they allowed prohibition to be repealed so that they didn't face a threat from up-and-coming gangsters able to use the same financing mechanism they did. Alcohol went back to being cheap, and it was cut off. Now the game is being played again, only this time with narcotics. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining the network. Interestingly enough, as we get into the economic news, Netflix is one of the poster children for the tech boom version 2.0, the golden cut. And it is revealing how something has gone cattywampus in the way Wall Street values companies. Because we're looking at a company that is going to have a $2 billion cash loss this year and is yet claimed to be worth $70 billion. And we have seen time and again of a lot of companies, they have their IPO, they're valued at huge amounts of money, and then the stock crashes on out. Are we seeing pump and dumps? Is Wall Street now living almost entirely on fraud? Very well be. We just put up an article from the Los Angeles Times about a study that's showing that the vast majority of tax evasion in this country is occurring up there at the very top, the 0.1%. They're masters at being able to keep all their money and not share it with anybody else. Remember what I talked about, a recycling mechanism, where the money, when it accumulates to the top of that pyramid, it must be brought back down to the bottom so that ordinary workers and middle-class people can trade their labor for decent wages and salaries in order to pump that wealth back into the system and keep it running. And that has disappeared as we descend into fascism, and that's why our economy is heading for a major upset. Another story coming on out from governmentslaves.info, because of the skyrocketing tax burden, more and more Americans are renouncing their citizenship. They're getting out and saying, we just can't do it anymore. There used to be a conventional wisdom that you could tax a nation to prosperity. It's never proven out. You can tax a nation into ruin and collapse, and that's what's going on right now. Now, the Federal Reserve Board has announced a $41 million penalty and consent cease and desist order against Deutsche Bank over Deutsche Bank's, basically, the polite phrase is, related to compliance by the U.S. banking operations with anti-money laundering laws. In other words, they got caught laundering drug money, and this is the fine they're going to pay, and it's probably a lot less than they were making laundering the drug money. So they'll pay the fine. Much of it will come off their taxes as a business loss, and they'll just go right on doing that. There is a huge amount of fraud in Wall Street, and it's not just Wall Street. Interesting little article out of Canadian Broadcasting, where apparently there has been a financial services representative who's been conducting an investigation for the CBC, basically saying that forgery in the finance industry is epidemic up in Canada, where they're basically using whiteout on documents, they're forging and photocopying customer signatures, adding initials to blank documents. And they're saying it's as much as 85% of the backroom sales team are doing it. The financial industry is a giant fraud operation. Now, over in Great Britain, British Telecom is thinking that they're going to have to shut down what they call their gold-plated defined benefit pension plan to try and close its looming deficit. They're losing money. People are going without services. They're not able to cover their overhead. And the British Telecom's pension scheme deficit in 2016 is thought to be somewhere around £14 billion, up from just $10 billion just the year before. And now British Telecom is entering negotiations with the pension trustees about the future funding of the scheme. In other words, everybody who spent their life working for British Telecom and paying into a pension plan, they are not going to get the pensions they were promised. And we're seeing that all over the world. We're seeing it here in the United States of America. Everybody's talking about the pension crisis. And much of the American pension crisis goes back to that 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud, because those mortgage-backed securities were rated AAA by Wall Street's pet rating agencies, which made it legal for pension plans to buy them, invest in them. The fraud collapsed. Those bundles went bust, and the pensions are now defunded. And nobody has the courage to stand up and say Wall Street fraud created this mess. Now they're saying, oh, the pensioners are expecting way too much. They're living too long. We've got to increase the retirement age. And government looks the other way here. Story from Die Welt over in Germany. Apparently there's a big problem with care homes being taken over by organized crime. And they've created a systematic fraud network where they're defrauding pensions and government of the money, and the patients in the care homes are not getting the care they're supposed to. There was a big stink about a year ago on the mainland where organized crime had moved into these property management companies, where they would get on the inside and they would hand all the contracts for maintenance and repair and building to mafia-linked companies who would charge very high prices and produce very poor quality work. The repairs and the construction would fall apart almost immediately, and they just churn the money out of these homeowner associations. Now, here's a very alarming story, and I want you to pay attention to it. This is from RINF.com. And the headline reads, credit scores hit record high as recession wounds heal. And the gist of the story is that credit scores for U.S. consumers are going up. They're going up. See, it's time to start borrowing again. Well, maybe. Maybe. Remember when they were talking about subprime mortgages back in 2008? And then more recently, they're talking about subprime auto loans, and they were going bust. And all of a sudden, the term subprime is now poison. So now, instead of giving out loans to people whose credit scores are too low, it's easier to simply change the way the credit scores are being calculated to run them up above the threshold for a loan. I think that may be what's going on here. I don't think people's credit scores are automatically going up because we still have 90 million Americans who are out of work. People don't want to borrow. This is just another way to try and trick people into borrowing, thinking everything's going to be okay. And the wise and prudent thing right now for everybody is to be trying to get out of debt. Pay off those credit cards, get them zeroed out as quickly as you can. Apparently, Michael Kors is planning to shutter anywhere between 100 and 125 stores. I got to tell you, we go down to the local mall here, the bottom of the hill, and it was rather amazing on Memorial Day. Not a lot of people shopping. People just don't have money. We have a very good friend who just lucked out in terms of, he knows a guy who owns a restaurant who bought a huge amount of steak expecting there were going to be a lot of people showing up at the restaurant for Memorial Day, and they didn't. And now he's literally having to give the meat away before it goes bad. Restaurant activity is a very good indicator of what's really going on with our economy. And again, look at the car prices. If anybody actually had money to spend on a car, now is a great time to get a car. Look at those ads. The amazing prices, amazing terms. And now apparently the price of used cars is starting to plummet because people can't even buy used cars anymore. We're broke out here. Now there's been a bit of a big stink starting to happen on college campuses. And it has to do with something being done by the Israel Defense Forces. It's called the Gideon Project. And it involves sending American Israeli reservists from the IDF onto college campuses to basically attack pro-Palestinian demonstrations, cause a ruckus. And, of course, they don't really have a right to be there. They're not actually students. They're just being sent on in there to try and shout down supporters of Palestine. And it reached, at one point, the UC Irvine campus literally had to call the police to escort these guys out. There we are. Now, another little story. This gets into the gun grabber situation. Apparently a history teacher walked onto school campus carrying what looked to be a rifle case, triggered a lockdown, called the police, went completely bonkers. Turns out the rifle was a recreated Civil War weapon, a replica, a non-firing replica. You see them in catalogs and toy stores all the time. He was bringing it in to show the students what a Civil War rifle looked like. And everybody went ballistic. Non-firing weapon. Now, here's another story. This one I actually was very disgusted with. And apparently, this being reported out of Post News D2. And it talks about a teacher was busted with meth and heroin at her school. She's accused of stealing from her own students to feed her drug habit. When the police arrested her, they found needles in her purse, including exposed needles, which is very, very dangerous. One was already loaded up with heroin. She had 4 grams of meth. Aren't they keeping an eye on those teachers? Or is it, I guess, as long as they're talking Common Core, doesn't really matter? You know, having been a teacher myself, I feel that teachers have a sense of responsibility to their students, not just to teach them the subject matter of the course, but to set an example on just how to present in society, how to have an ethical, moral core. And you know, I'm not a proselytizer, but if you're a teacher and those students are looking up to you, there's a responsibility that goes with that. And I think that, I find that very appalling. Very appalling that way. All right, let's talk a little bit about computers here. This next one is fun. Ooh, I wish I could have one of these. Intel has just revealed its most powerful PC chip yet. They're calling it the Core i9. It has 18 processing cores, and it clocks at teraflop speed. And it is a very expensive chip. It's $2,000. It is aimed at users carrying out heavy tasks like video editing, 3D modeling, special effects creation, and boy, looking back on the hardware we had to use in the days of Robert Abel and Associates, wow, a supercomputer on a chip. It's just dazzling. More about this when we come back. Hello, I'm America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about Intel's newest chip. It's called the Core i9. It has 18 processing cores in it. It's benchmarked out at teraflop speeds, which is amazing. And for young people, they may say, okay. For those of us who've been around since the early days of home computers, this is just astounding. And one of the things that does remind me that I am now an old man is how impressed I am with some of the latest developments. I'm still just jazzed by my little Raspberry Pi here. But there's a word of caution. It is a lot of computer power, but the problem can be actually getting that computer power onto the problem. And the first thing that occurred to me when I'm hearing teraflop speed 18 cores is there a backplane, meaning a motherboard, that can actually support that traffic? Because you could have a situation where all of that computer power is just sitting and waiting while data is being moved in and out of RAM. And that can be very fast. To get the maximum performance out of a computer like this, you really have to be very careful that you tailor the hardware and software to the specific application to get your maximum throughput. And a lot of people in the computer animation industry, they'll buy computers that benchmark out at thus and such, and then they'll put their software on there, and they're not really seeing the throughput. And a lot of it often has to do with the fact that these high-powered processors are sitting and waiting for the disk's drive to come back, the memory to come back, the interfaces to come back. So you have to be very careful about that and how you would design or possibly pipeline all of those cores. That being said, it is an amazing achievement. I remember when I was working in my animation career, and I worked briefly for a company that bought a connection machine by a company called Thinking Machines. And it had 8,000 processors in this black cube, and there were all these red lights all over the front of it. And they wanted to put a ray tracer on it. And I pointed out to them that the architecture of the connection machine did not lend itself to ray tracing, because while the 8,000 processors could work together very rapidly on certain classes of problems, it made a real nice Mandelbrot generator. It was very inefficient at shipping around large data sets, which are required for ray tracing. And as a demonstration, I threw one of my own pieces of software on a Little Sun workstation that cost like a 20th of a connection machine, and I achieved 25% of the rendering throughput, which did not make me very popular with the management that had decided to invest in the connection machine. And then a little while later, I was briefly connected to the production of the first Jurassic Park movie. I worked for Sidley Wright Motion Works, and we pitched to them to do some of the animation work. We didn't get the job. But while I was there, I did talk to one of the producers about a story point in the original book where they were using Cray supercomputers to do the genome matching. And I said, that's not really an appropriate machine for this kind of work. You ought to look into the connection machine. And sure enough, in the movie, they're using Thinking Machines connection machines, supercomputers. That's my one tangible contribution to Jurassic Park. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Tom in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good day, Michael. Speaking of Jurassic Park, I think that Kathy Griffin should be in Jurassic Park, buried somewhere. But
now, what did those T-Rexes ever do to you?
Yeah, right. Or the Raptors. But yeah, Michael, I'm so upset about this because if there would have been somebody doing that to Obama, they would already be in prison. It would be on the news for the next year. You wouldn't. It would be 24/7 on the news about what a Republican did to Obama, with Obama's head bleeding, bloody head cut off. Can you imagine this? You know what, Michael? When I'm kind of concerned, what happens if somebody actually, some crazy guy does get this Captain Griffin and takes care of her? You're going to hear about that in the news. I guarantee you that.
Yeah, I can. It was way over the top here. It was way over the top, and as I said before, we're supposed to have a First Amendment guarantee to freedom of speech, but with that freedom comes the responsibility that what we are saying, first of all, is true and accurate and fair and just. And Kathy just went way over the top, and I'm glad she's feeling the backlash on it. It was wholly inappropriate for her to do that. All right, well, listen, Tom, we're going to take...
hold on. Hold on, Mike. I got something else I'd like to bring up.
All right, we'll keep you over the commercial break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking with Tom in Florida. You had something else you wanted to share with us.
Yeah, Michael, I wanted to bring up the fact of a couple of days ago they had this incident going on. I mean, this thing that's going on in Texas with the immigration. These illegals are protesting, and the congressman there, and they say he was going to shoot the other guy. And these Democrats are, Michael, what's going on is these people are here in this country illegally, breaking the law, and they're not. And the guy was right. He was going to call ICE and tell them to go get. They should be arrested. Now they had this guy Jorge Ramos on here, one of these local talk shows, and this guy's some guy called in and asked him, why don't we have the same laws as Mexico on our immigration? As far as immigration, that guy Jorge Ramos dodged the whole time. He kept ducking it. Well, Mexico's different than the United States, he kept saying. What's the difference, Jorge?
Well, I think it would be very appropriate for us to have the same immigration laws as Mexico. You can't just walk across the border into Mexico and get jobs and free stuff. You walk across that border into Mexico, you are going to jail. And, of course, it's a major stumbling point for the open borders people. Where they're out there trying to say that everybody has a right to go anywhere they want in the world, and no, that is absolutely, there is no such right. They're making it up. Everybody loves to use that word. I have a right to take your TV set out of your living room because I'm economically disadvantaged. I have a right to come into your country and avail myself of the taxpayer-funded social services. And some of the arguments for the immigration people are getting ridiculous. There was an article we had at whatreallyhappened.com earlier today where they're out there saying that enforcement of immigration and deportations is going to be bad for the economy. It's already bad for the economy because all these poor illegal immigrants, they're staying at home. They're too scared to go on out and spend money at the stores, and that's what's harming the economy. Really, where are they getting the money that you think they're going to be spending at the stores? And it's just
there you go, Michael.
Absolute utter nonsense.
But Michael, these people are so brazen. They're illegally here and they're protesting in the capital of Texas and telling the establishment government, like, screw you, we own this place. This is a disaster. And what's going on? You had these Democrats, congressman, he's a Hispanic congressman, attacking this guy because he wants the government to do their job. And this guy's getting threats and all that by these guys. Hey, look at this guy Gutierrez. This guy's paying his wife $13,000. I mean, if that was a Republican, they would be crucifying him right now in the media. It's unbelievable what's going on here. But as far as illegal immigration, Michael, like they had on Hannity a while back, there's over 100,000 gang members in Los Angeles alone. 100,000.
That's an army.
So that's an army. Exactly. Yep. That's a standing army, Michael. And look at all the ones in California. There's, 3.5 million illegals in that state? 4 million now?
Yep.
And the people are there are fleeing. They're all going to Arizona, Wyoming, Montana, whatever they can go, I guess. But what's going on in Texas is unbelievable. I mean, yeah, they should be all... Look, Michael, it's not like it hasn't happened before. Eisenhower rounded up 3 million of them.
Yes.
Back in 1955, 56. So I don't want to hear this crap from these liberal shrines that it can't be done. They can be ported all out if they have to. It might take 5 years. In 5 years, you can round them all up. 5, 6 years, but you can do it. Eisenhower did it in 2 or 3 years.
You don't even need to do that. Just enforce the existing Title VIII laws where anybody who is providing aid and comfort to an illegal immigrant can be arrested and thrown in jail. You cut off their employment. You cut off all the free stuff. And these illegal immigrants, rather than starve to death in the streets of the United States of America, they're going to go back over that border into Mexico.
You're absolutely right, Michael. 100% correct.
Okay?
Okay, thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
All right.
And, like I said, there's so many homeless right now in the United States. It's a joke. And you're going to keep bringing people in here. I don't want to hear this crap. You go down South Florida here and see there's hundreds of people downtown in Lauderdale and Miami that are not working, Michael. They're homeless. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable.
You're
going to talk about bringing more people in here?
We have it here. We have an estimated 4,000 homeless people on the island of Oahu, and they're bringing in some of the refugees. They're bringing them in here as well. I mean, it really is. It's insane. It's completely, utterly insane. It only makes sense, of course, in the context of this push for a global government, a one-world government, ruling over a population of people who've just been blended together in order to destroy any sense of a cultural, regional, or historical identity. Anyway, Tom, we're going to
Michael, let's imagine this if Hillary had won. That's all I can tell you. Jeez. Thank God for Trump. That's all I can tell you.
Okay.
Blown out the country. All right, God bless you. Have a great day.
All right, same to you, Tom. We're going to switch over to Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. It's a good thing you let him blow some steam. You definitely need the relief valve to go on him.
Yeah, I think he's drinking too much coffee.
Yeah, I called about the computer stuff. I heard you talking about the new chip for the computers, and the thing that struck me is they must have made some significant progress in these heat dissipation issues. I remember back to the early Cyrix chips that got up to 166 megahertz, and they were having problems back then, and they'd always have. And then they said the issue was like looking at this down at the
it may require active cooling.
Level.
I mean, this chip may require active cooling where there's, literally a liquid-based cooling system and a big heat exchanger out on the back. We're already seeing that with some of the higher-end graphics processors where air cooling isn't really sufficient. And so they literally have a little tiny refrigeration unit to keep the heat under control. Anybody who's going to buy this $2,000 chip for that kind of applications, obviously you're going to build a box around it that is going to try and maximize all of that. Yeah, there are liquid-based cooling systems for high-performance chips, especially people who love to overclock the chips.
That's right, and that's obviously a tower case type thing, desktop, I think. But for the laptops, I was thinking, I've heard, we're actually to the point now where they have all these faster things, and then they've had heat issues and fire issues with laptops too. So you have to make sure you keep your fan vents open and don't clutter up, and that's the thing. And they have cooling pads for laptops that you can get, but with laptops, there's this trade-off between performance, how hot your processor is, and how much RAM you use, and battery life. So it's actually a point where people have to start realizing if all I'm doing is surfing the web, even if I'm video streaming or maybe gaming, I don't necessarily need a laptop that is the super fastest thing in the world, but maybe I need it to last 2 hours, on a battery. So
that's what everybody. Not everybody needs an 8-core or even a 4-core processor. The only reason this machine here has 8 cores is because I do video or editing on it and 3D animation on it. Like the laptop that runs the Skype channel for that's a single CPU unit. That's all it really needs to be. And you're absolutely right.
For my portable I take to work, I just need web and mail capability, and I get a good 2.5 hours out of it, which is really good. The other observation I wanted to make was about the monitors and TVs. The way the full flat screen market has changed in the machining and materials and workmanship and everything like that. Somebody just gave me a 24-inch old a Dell monitor, several years old, that they had purchased, and it has this beautiful swivel. It's really nicely designed and nicely machined metal, and it's a swivel base that goes up and down and stuff like that. And it's got some weight to it for stabilization. And it's like, wow, they don't make that anymore. And same with TVs. A friend of mine, all the TVs are coming out with 2 legs on them instead of a nice pedestal swivel base. This saves on weight for shipping, and it's cheaper and everything like that. So this stuff is becoming, like the TVs are really wow now. They're looking really good. And they're much more commoditized, much cheaper. But
yeah, but I have one complaint about that, and then we're going to get off this because we got too far off into computers, and I want to get back to politics and the rest of the stories here. Is the software that comes with it? There are so many problems, and it's kind of weird. When we had our internet blackout on Sunday and Monday, we went back to our old DVD collection. And the first thing I did when I plugged in the disc on the DVD, it comes on up and says, oh, you need to have a firmware upgrade to the player before you can play this disc, which since we didn't have access to the Internet, I couldn't actually do. And I'll tell you, one of the things that really annoys me about our TV, and this is coming out of, it's a Samsung unit, it's always updating its Smart Hub. And Claire and I will be watching TV, and we're having a good time, and all of a sudden this big box appears on the front of the screen. Your Smart Hub is now up to date. Do you care to start it? No, I don't. And it just gets in the way, and it interferes. I have to be very honest, there are days I miss old-fashioned TV. Glass tube, two knobs, off on volume, and the channel selector. And everyone says, oh, well, it took, minutes for those tubes to light up. Yeah, it takes minutes for these TVs to boot up on their internal software. And yes, it's higher resolution, and that's a really good thing. There's a lot more channels, but then all the channels are carrying the same thing. So it's not necessarily the wonderful leap forward that we like. Yes, there's progress that's been made. I do like high def. We hardly ever use the 3D, and I think 4K is going to be a passing fad. I don't think it's going to last. Certainly for people for people of Claire and our age across the living room here with our eyes, we're never going to tell the difference between normal high def and a 4K. That's just the reality, and that's why we're never going to get one. Anyway, Glenn, going to let you go here.
All right, Mike. Thank you.
Thanks an awful lot, and do join us on the air, 800-313-9443. Now, apparently, if you're an Android user, and this stuff is completely out of control, you may have been infected by advertising fraud malware that apparently was in the Google Play Store for years. And this malware is dubbed Judy by researchers at Checkpoint who discovered it, and it was discovered in 41 different applications in the Google Play Store. They're all made by this publisher, NStudio. Now, Google's already yanked these infected apps, but they have absolutely no idea how many people fell victim to this. Now, as you know, we try and keep the What Really Happened website as malware-free as possible. We pay for a service that scans the website every single day to make sure that we don't have malware. We've had a big problem with malvertisers who seem to be legitimate advertising companies, and they'll come on in, we'll place their ads, and all of a sudden they're serving malware to our readers. And it's a big headache always trying to track them down because they go through layer after layer after layer after server after server after server. So you can't tell who is actually doing what without a huge amount of effort. And it really did take us a while to track this last one down. And it really is out of control. And I want to share a couple of insights because I did work in advertising early on in my computer animation career because TV commercials were the only things that could afford computer animation back then. We're talking the 1980s. And there are rules in advertising, and one is you don't annoy your potential customer. The more aggressive advertising gets, the more it throws itself up in front of what you're trying to see, the more you're going to turn off the people. It doesn't translate to sales. And we know there's a lot of fraud going on in the online advertising industry with click bots that are clicking the ad links automatically using these click bot farms that are actually set for the purpose, and they're defrauding their clients. But the bottom line is I think people are beginning to realize numbers of clicks don't necessarily translate to numbers of sales. And I think more and more companies are going to be looking at how many sales are we actually getting out of this ad. Don't tell me how many clicks you got. I got 15 million clicks in one sale. That's not working for me. But the online advertising industry needs to look back at the basics of advertising as it has been established throughout the decades. Because there are rules in advertising, and those rules exist for a very good reason, because through trial and error, we know what is really working and what doesn't. And simply aggressively shoving yourself into the face of a potential customer, that's not going to work. You have to lure them. You have to intrigue them. You have to involve them mentally. Ask a question. Get them thinking about what they're seeing. That's where the creativity in advertising comes on in. And there's a real dearth of it. So, and it is very angering when we find out that places like Google Play Store or the iTunes Store have been compromised, and what they are sending on out is infected with malware. It is totally out of control. And where's the NSA in all of this? Can't be found. Maybe they're behind some of it. Now, getting on back to WannaCrypt, very interesting revelation. This came out of the register in Great Britain. Apparently, the WannaCrypt ransomware was primarily targeting Windows XP machines, even though it's been officially sunsetted. But apparently, one of the things that prevented it from spreading too far was the WannaCrypt was actually crashing the XP systems. And this is a case of where the blue screen of death was actually saving your life on this malware. But it underscores something else. Remember that WannaCrypt was built with NSA hacking tools that were leaked out and placed on the dark web. And it seems like all these NSA tools are still living in the days of XP. Like maybe they have not been able to update them to Windows 7, 8, Windows 10. Nobody can get Windows 10 to work. So maybe revealing that the NSA hacking toolkit is actually outdated. Now, there's been another development regarding WannaCry. As you know, they were out there saying, oh, it's definitely North Korea, it's North Korea, it's not, oh, no, it's Russia, it's Russia, it's Russia. But apparently some experts over at Kaspersky Labs is saying that the indications they're seeing in the code outside of the NSA building blocks point squarely at China as the author of WannaCry. Now, maybe it's CIA using their special department for false flag cyber attacks. But it really is very hard to tell. Meanwhile, as if we didn't have enough headaches, this is coming out of RIMP.com. The CIA is expanding an existing program that tries to influence corporate media outlets to promote fake propaganda stories by having their online shills troll internet forums, social media, and website comment sections in an effort to disrupt independent media sites. They're trying to come on in and cause trouble, and I assume that means calling up talk radio shows and screaming about Jews this and Jews that so that they can say, oh, they're anti-Semites over there. But it is a massive propaganda effort. They're so busy trying to fight against the truth, they don't have any resources left over to deal with real crime and terror, do they? We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, over in Ethiopia, as you know, it's the end of the school year in a lot of places, and the students are getting ready to do their exams, and apparently the use of personal electronic devices to cheat has become so widespread that Ethiopia has shut off the internet for the entire country during exams week. Little extreme. I think just shutting off the Wi-Fi routers in the schools might be sufficient, but that's what they decided they wanted to do with that. Here's another example of why the hacking has gone completely out of control. And it's sort of another version of ransom attack. But apparently over in Lithuania, there is this plastic surgery clinic, the Grozio Chirurgia Clinic, and their servers got broken into by a group calling themselves the Tsar Team, and they basically looted all the patient records. And then they contacted all the patients and said, unless you send us ransom, we will post all the pictures of your plastic surgery before and after, including naked photos of them that were taken as part of the preparation for whatever plastic surgery they were going to have. And apparently a lot of the patients either could not or would not pay it, and so the material has been released online, which can be very traumatic for a lot of people. But I think cybercrime has really reached a point of being a clear and present danger to the economy of the nation itself. And I think it's time that the NSA, FBI, and CIA quit their war on those of us who want to tell the truth and actually do what their job descriptions are. Go after these criminals. Because we're reaching a point where the Internet as a whole is becoming a very, very dangerous place to do business on. And I know that those rulers who are just sick and tired of having their lies exposed constantly would be perfectly okay going back to the 1950s, where business was done by telephone and postal letter, but I don't think it's really realistic at all. And I do think it's time for something to really be done. There needs to be a national agenda of dealing with cybercrime. Ransomware writers, hackers, DOS attackers. There are things that can be implemented at the internet level to guarantee absolute tracking of where things are coming from. And it is reaching a crisis point. The sheer cost, the losses in productivity, the losses, the economic losses, it's a crisis, and it does need to be dealt with. So, again, technology is neither good or bad, whether it's computers, TV sets, even firearms. It is the people deciding how to use them that is good or evil. Going to take a break for station identification. Back after this brief word. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Please feel free to call on in here. The more you call in, the less you have to listen to me. All right, let's talk about vaccines. As you know, this has become a very contentious issue. President Trump has created a Vaccine Safety Commission headed by Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. The corporate media is trying to ignore them with as much dignity as possible. We're not hearing a lot of stuff coming on out, but it is a beginning here. And we were reporting yesterday how Sweden, despite being a very liberal government, has now banned mandatory vaccinations over the growing concern over adverse health effects of all these vaccines. One of the real problems that we're dealing with is when vaccines are being tested, and they're not always tested all that well. They're never tested in combination, and yet that is how they are administered. They'll just pour all this stuff into a single syringe and stick it in the kid's arm and hit that plunger, and that's it. And the kid has an adverse reaction, and they say, oh, well, it's shaken baby syndrome. It's genetic. Certainly couldn't be our medications here. And yet we're hearing that the Vaccine Safety Court that was set up to deal with vaccine-injured children is paying out huge amounts of money. So there's an issue. Now it gets even more interesting. Over at Jackson State, scientists conducted a study. They analyzed data from homeschool organizations in 4 states, and they looked for a broad range of diseases in more than 650 children, 39% of whom were unvaccinated. And here is what they found. Compared to the unvaccinated children, vaccinated children had an increased risk of autism, 4.2 times. ADHD, 4.2 times. Learning disabilities, 5.2 times. Eczema, 2.9 times. I often wondered if eczema was an adverse vaccine event. Allergic rhinitis, 30 times. Now, the vaccinated children had a lower likelihood of 2 vaccine-preventable illnesses, chickenpox and pertussis, but they found no reduction of other supposedly vaccine-preventable illnesses such as hepatitis A or B, measles, mumps, rubella, influenza, meningitis, or rotavirus. In other words, the vaccines for those illnesses do not work. They do not reduce the incidence of these illnesses. It's just a big money-making scam, like patent medicines were in the last century. If you remember, if you're my age, you probably remember Geritol. Cures iron poor, tired blood. It was the last of the patent medicines. It's just money. $30 billion a year pushing vaccines. And they cause a great deal of harm, and as this study over at Jackson State is showing, they're not really helping. They're causing more harm than good. Now, down in Australia. Kind of a sad story. Over in the Sunshine Coast area, there was a little ad hoc program created by people living in this area called the Urban Food Street. And basically it started 7 years ago, where people just started planting food-producing plants on open greenway, mostly fruit-bearing trees. And it came to span 11 streets in the suburb, and more than 200 people were availing themselves of the food that was just growing outside their homes. And apparently the Sunshine Coast Council received a complaint that these food trees were unsightly, and they chopped them all down and mulched them. Just destroyed it. And the residents are not to be surprised about it. They're very upset. They had worked on this project for 7 years. It was working out for them. And the council gets a complaint. They're not saying from who, but I think we can guess. Some local supermarket said, how dare they grow their own food and not bring us their money. Remember the legend of Johnny Appleseed? Was this vagabond who traveled all over the U.S., and he loved apples, and he would eat apples, and he would save the seeds, and he would replant them. And supposedly this is the reason that there are, or were, so many apple trees all over that part of the United States. We almost need a Johnny food seed. We need to take what these people were doing in their neighborhood and launch it on a national scale. Go to your local gardening store, get some food crop seeds, and just start sticking them on every empty patch of ground you can. And nobody owns it. It just grows, and it's there for people to avail themselves of, especially the homeless and hungry. Start turning the United States back into a farming country at the grassroots level. And of course, this will be opposed by the big farming corporations who do not think you should have a right to grow your own food or eat what you find, but you must buy it at the store. One of the really nice things about the Hawaiian Islands, not so much here on Oahu, although there's been a little bit, is there is food growing all over the place. Mangoes, papaya, bananas, all over the place. And especially on the outer islands like Kauai, you can just walk and grab and eat the stuff. Because if you don't, it's just going to fall to the ground and rot anyway. And that's the way nature is supposed to work, but corporations hate nature. Now, as you know, the United States has become one of the most litigious nations on earth. And sometimes it gets really silly. We've heard about these lawsuits where somebody will get a cup of hot coffee at McDonald's and spill it in their lap and say, oh, you didn't warn me that it was hot. And this is the latest one. Out in California, a woman is suing the makers of Jelly Belly jelly beans because they didn't warn her that they contained sugar. Now, first of all, if you get any of the Jelly Belly products, there is a list of ingredients on the back, and it does say sugar. But she is saying that somewhere along the line she was tricked into believing that one of the company's candy products was free of sugar, and she was eating it, and I don't know if it was bad for her diet or she was diabetic, but she's now trying to sue the company. And where's your sense of personal responsibility? I mean, Claire and I these days, especially because of certain chemical sensitivities we both have, we read labels. We go to the supermarket, you know, I'm not shy. I've got a little magnifying glass I take with me to read that tiny print. We read the labels to know what we're putting in our body. One of the ways I was able to lose almost 100 pounds was by simply avoiding certain chemicals by reading the labels. By the way, for those of you watching on BAM User, these shorts I'm wearing, 40 waist. Yay! Go diet. I'm almost at my target weight. Then I'm going to celebrate with a double cheese pizza. All right, we were talking about yesterday about Hanford being America's version of Chernobyl. It is one of the most heavily contaminated areas on Earth. It's now dealing with this issue that some of these plutonium reprocessing plants, storage facilities, are aged and decayed and beginning to collapse. They're covering them with tarps, which is not really a solution. And it is a mess, and they keep saying, well, we'll let somebody else fix it down the road. But we're down the road, and we're dealing with all of these messes. Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, Hanford. And it is a mess, and they don't know what to do with all of this highly radioactive mess. It's going to take a major political will and a major investment to find a real solution on where to put all of this stuff. It'd be really ideal to just drop it all in the sun. It's not going to cause any difficulty over there. Story coming out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain. America's nuclear safety plans are based on a flawed analysis. And researchers are warning that a single waste fire in any of these spent fuel rod storage areas could spread radioactive material throughout an area twice the size of New Jersey. And these researchers are saying the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission's failure to adopt a critical protection measure has left Americans at risk of such a catastrophic event. But then we have come to understand in recent years that most of these federal government agencies aren't really doing the job they're supposed to be doing. They're there to make it look like the government is taking care of you. We thought the Minerals Management Service was keeping an eye on the Deepwater Horizon. We thought the SEC was keeping an eye on Bernie Madoff. And we think the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is doing something about this rapidly accumulating nuclear waste problem. And they aren't. One of the biggest problems that you're dealing with is if any of this material catches fire, then the radiation spreads. It's already bad enough just confined in these little vats or these tanks or these pools. Stuff is naturally flammable. That's why it's so dangerous, because the decay process in those spent fuel rods, if it's not being actively cooled, can reach the spontaneous combustion point of these fuel rods, and they will burn, and the smoke will get on out there. And the smoke is dangerous because if you inhale it, you are permanently contaminated. But we're too busy spending money bombing other countries to deal with a very high-risk situation in this country. Meanwhile, over in Portugal, their parliament has voted to request the closure of Spain's Almazar nuclear plant. Now, this Spanish plant is just across the border, upwind of sections of Portugal, and they're concerned because there have been several incidents there involving fires. There hasn't been a nuclear release yet that anybody knows of, but Portugal is saying they feel it represents a danger to them. Meanwhile, 3 Mile Island plant is going to completely close in 2019. As you know, following the 3 Mile Island accident, the rest of the power plants and nuclear reactors continued operating, but it's reached actually beyond the end of its lifespan, and it's losing money now. So it will close in 2019. We're going to take a phone call. Francis in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yo, dude. Hello, aloha.
Aloha nui.
Oh, okay. I got two thoughts for you. One, as far as reading the print on packaging, as far as your food items go, I think that's intentionally designed to be tiny print, so that way it discourages people from actually bothering to take the time to read it.
Oh, of course.
And realizing, oh my.
Of course, that's exactly why, and that's why the package inserts on pharmaceuticals are printed in microscopic type on that very thin paper. They're legally required to put that information there, but they don't want you looking at it.
Well, for one thing, it's going to make people feel bad that they have to get a magnifier, even though their vision is probably really good, to have to read that sort of thing. So it discourages people from trying to read that blooming thing. So it's a cyber warfare deal for you, and which I can empathize because I read ingredients packaging when I'm shopping, because if I can't read what the terminology is, I'm not going to mess with it.
Oh, we follow that rule, too. If we can't pronounce it, we don't put it in our mouth.
Go figure. Relating to the technology aspect that was being discussed earlier, for that matter, I had an interesting encounter with a gal at a bank when I went to the bank earlier today. Gosh, who knows? She had one. I know she had something around her neck, and I thought it was like some sort of a funky plastic jewelry collar or something she had on. It turns out it was something having to do with what she called her Bluetooth for dealing with her phone and so forth. And I asked her, I said, "Oh my gosh, is that what that is?" And I said, "Do you ever wonder if that's going to cause a problem with your throat or your thymus gland between your throat and your heart or whatever the case might be, with all those waves running around in that area? Do you ever wonder if there might be a problem caused because of that?" She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, for one thing, as far as your physical glands go in the body, that's right in that area where if that's actually working radio waves or microwaves or whatever kind you want to talk about that deals with your cell phone or who knows what electronic toy, that's focusing in that area, and that's a very touchy part of the, well, besides for your genitalia, that's another sensitive part of the body.
Yes.
Especially being close to your heart. So, I mean, it looks really neat and funky and sophisticated, but you might want to research a little bit to see what kind of effect it might be having on your physiology and all that. And maybe, I don't know, I know myself, I tend to use a wire to connect between a cell phone or iPhone or whatever you want to call it and my ear. And so I have to worry about having something shoved in my ear all the time. So, but she looked at me surprised like, my gosh, I never thought of that. So I have a feeling she's going to be doing some of her own research about that deal, but that's the first I've seen that, and they've probably had it out for some time.
Well, here's the problem, first of all, these technologies will be put out there, and very often they won't know what the risk factors are. Now, when the airport scanners first came on out, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth came on out, the theory was that these radio waves are so low-powered they couldn't possibly tear apart molecular bonds, the way a microwave oven does at much higher energy levels. Then, I think it was over at Johns Hopkins, they discovered a phenomenon called molecular resonance, where molecules could be set to vibrating in sympathy with these radio waves, and even though an individual radio wave couldn't break the molecules could shake themselves apart, the way the Tacoma Narrows Bridge did, Galloping Gertie. And this wasn't known when this technology first came out. I'll give you another good example. This goes all the way back to the 1930s when shoe stores would have these fluoroscopes, where you would go into the store and you'd put your feet in this little box, and there was a console in front of you, and it would show you how your shoes were fitting your feet. You'd see all the bones in your feet and everything. It was really, really cool. If you remember the movie $1 Billion Brain with Michael Caine, they actually have one in there. Then in the 1960s, they all of a sudden realized shoe store salesmen were all dying of cancer. And they began to realize that X-rays were causing the cancer, that X-rays are dangerous radiation. And it was still 1980s before they got them all out of there. And so that's always the risk here, because they'll come out with a technology that say, we think it's safe, we've tested it, we haven't found any problems. It doesn't mean they're not going to discover there was a problem down the road. And that's a good reason to not be on the cutting edge of the next whiz-bang thing that's coming on out. I know there's a lot of people expressing concern over cell phone radiation affecting your brain, because cell phones actually are very powerful radio signals if you're far away from the cell tower. The cell phones will adjust the power of their transmitter based on how close you are to the cell tower. The closer you are to the cell tower, the lower the power, the longer your batteries will last. But if you're well away from the cell tower, it can be a very, very strong radio signal that's going on out. And again, like studying vaccine safety, it's something nobody wants to look at because of its potential for a negative impact on an established industry. But it does seem like after a while you do need to be careful. I remember years ago when I was down in Australia, they were going through a program where radio and TV transmitters had been built up right in the middle of residential communities, and they were in the process of tearing them all down and moving them to more remote locations up on top of mountains because of the growing concern that, yes, this constant radio waves at high power were causing problems. We know that there's an issue with elevated cancers and leukemias around what are called the VLF and ELF transmitter sites that communicate with submerged submarines. So there's an issue there, but again, nobody really wants to look at it. One of the weird things is that you actually cannot find a map that shows you cancer incidence based on geography. Neighborhood to neighborhood, county to county. It's almost like these things are classified. They don't want you to know where the elevated cancer rates are because it may prove to be a very embarrassing location. Anyway, Francis, we're going to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. Back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I got an email from somebody saying that this guerrilla seating idea is actually something we should all consider right now because when the economy goes down and the corporate supply chain we're all being forced to be dependent on collapses, if there's food growing all over in all the open ground, then we're all not going to starve to death. So there's a safety net right now that we can all start building, and all it's going to take is a few dollars worth of seeds from your local gardening shop. So we can move forward with that. All right, back to the telephones. Rick in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike. I just wanted to share a thought I had that with the New World Order, how it seems like an impossible task. It's what I found in my time is through deep thinking and just great gratitude for a subject already tended to in our mind and in our thinking. A lot of times we can make it come to reality just by accepting the fact that we've already beat them, and even though it may not be real, if we can believe it, like they use 9/11 and school and church, everything against us.
Well, you know the old saying, it isn't over till the fat lady sings, and certainly the New World Order agenda is in serious trouble. They're struggling just to hold together the European Union and the North American Union, but I'm not ready to say that we have defeated the New World Order. We have made them stumble. We have exposed what they're doing to the general population, and the general population is starting to push back. But I don't think we should start saying, yes, we beat the New World Order and we can kick back on our lounge chairs and relax. We definitely cannot do that.
No, I agree with you 100%. No, we definitely can't do that. I think we should take every moment that we find ourselves bored at any moment in our mind to just conjure up the fact that it is possible if we all would just believe in a deep thought that it is possible that they are now defeated and they are down and we're up.
Well, I think at some point it's going to happen. I mean, the reality is if you have the planet Earth's population of billions of humans all standing up at the same time and say, enough with this global government empire stuff, we're not going to go along with it, it is going to fall apart. The downside is that in their rush to create this global government, they've created a climate for a global revolution that in turn could usher in, unfortunately, a new dark ages. There's some good, there's some bad. But I definitely do not agree with the idea of a global government, simply because we see how the larger a government gets, the more corrupt and tyrannical and abusive it gets. A global government means the end of choice in how we will live our lives. And I think that we need to go back to a planet with 1,000 little tiny nations, all about the same size, all taking care of their own people. Yes, there's going to be tourism, there's going to be cross-border trade, but anytime you get a group of people who start thinking about, I want to rule it all, horrible things will then follow.
Yes, I agree 100% with that.
Okay.
Just like I said, I wish that we could all come together in a heartfelt, like they did with us when they put 9/11 on us, and we all came together with a thought. There's such power behind us all thinking one thought, and that's what my message is. Us all think one thought, and that one thought is we're beyond these monsters.
Again, I don't think we're beyond them. We are definitely beside them, and we're definitely tripping them up. But this fight is not over yet. These people have invested too much money, too many years trying to bring about their global government. This has been a multi-generational thing, and there's still, unfortunately, a ways to go. All right, well, Rick, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go with that phone call. Getting word now that ADT Security is now pulling their advertising from CNN over Kathy Griffin's beheading photo. Now, they're a little late to the gate because CNN has already terminated their contract with Kathy Griffin to co-host their New Year's show. But it is nice to see people pushing back on that because Kathy was way over the top with that. That was wholly inappropriate. Whether you like Donald Trump or not, that was a very inappropriate thing for her to do. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're getting on back to Fukushima and other radioactive disasters here. Apparently, Donald Trump's new budget is terminating the funding for the Aiken County MOX project. This is along the Savannah River. Now, the MOX facility stands for Mixed Oxide Fuel, and it's a process by which they're making a new type of fuel rod for power stations, and they're trying to use up decommissioned plutonium or unused plutonium that was created for bombs that were never built. And so what they do is they try and mix a little bit of the plutonium in with the uranium to manufacture the fuel rods, and they get a slightly more powerful fuel rod. But it's also very, very dangerous, and again, it's very, very flammable. And Trump's budget is basically cutting off the funding for this Savannah River site where they're going to be making this stuff. And they're stressing that they want to start pursuing an alternative disposition method. In other words, since they can't recycle the plutonium into reactor fuel rods, how are we going to get rid of it? Because it's radioactive. And how are you going to get rid of it? Now, what's really amazing is that there are other means of nuclear power production, such as the thorium cycle reactors. And the thorium cycle reactors, other countries are starting to build them. Thorium is a very common element in the Earth's crust, much more common than uranium. And the thorium cycle process results in far less radioactive waste. But the American fascination with uranium fission reactors is because they produce bomb stuff as a byproduct. And that's why they're still locked into that technology, which has been proven to be insanely dangerous. Other countries are starting to make a lot of progress towards sustainable hot fusion reactors, which are far cleaner than fission reactors. And apparently there is still some progress being made out there with what was called cold fusion. And they're starting to say it isn't fusion, but there is something going on there, where past a certain point you are getting more heat energy out from these little reactors than you are putting in. It goes past break even, and they're not really sure what's going on. I know the U.S. military labs have been playing around with this as a potential power source for things that go boom. I think if we took the military imperative out of science and technology, we'd see a lot more interesting things start to develop. Because technological development in this country right now is basically ruled by, would this have a military application? And if it does, you get funding. And if it doesn't, well, good luck on that one. This is why I keep saying I'm fully supportive of Donald Trump's efforts to revitalize NASA, to pull them away from rubber stamping the human-caused global warming nonsense and getting on back out there into space, rebuilding our low Earth orbit capability, which they're in progress of doing there, privatization like SpaceX, because NASA represented, back during the height of the Apollo Moon project, NASA represented a civilian technology incubator that was creating new technologies to solve the problems of going to the moon, and those new technologies spawned new products and new industries and new jobs. The tech boom of the 70s, 80s, and 90s was forged in the Apollo Moon project, and we need something like that again. Technology developed for the military is never released to the public until it is so old it is useless. So we need to do that. Now, getting on to human-caused global warming. The UN chief, Antonio Guterres, is out there saying that climate-aware businesses will dominate tomorrow's economy. In a healthy economy, you might be able to do that. They could afford the luxury of being climate-aware. In economies around the world that are struggling just to survive, the addition of any more regulatory compliance could be the death blow. So Guterres is out there saying climate change is the defining element of our time. Now let us be very, very clear here. Climate always changes. It always has. It always will. It was changing long before humans ever arrived. It'll go on changing long after humans are gone. Nobody is saying climate change doesn't happen. The issue is this effort to claim that it is all the fault of human beings, that we are warming the earth, that snowfalls are going to be a thing of the past, and that we should atone for our sins with carbon taxes, buying of carbon credits, and allowing a global environmental authority to decide for us what our standard of living will be. And if you pinned my article on ClimateGate, and you've seen that link below to this collection of all the absurd things that have been blamed on global warming, to just try and sell that idea. And apparently, adding to that list, Chelsea Clinton is out there saying that child marriage is a result of global warming. It just is absurd. Well, Chelsea, now for the bad news. Updated data from NASA satellite instruments revealed the Earth's polar ice caps have not receded at all since the satellite instruments began measuring the ice caps all the way back in 1979. Since the end of 2012, total polar ice extent has largely remained above the post-1979 average. This data contradicts one of the most frequently asserted global warming claims that global warming is causing the polar ice caps to recede. It isn't happening. The reason the carbonazis like to talk about the polar ice is the same reason that Ramses liked to tell the people of Egypt about what happened at Kadesh, knowing they could not go up there themselves to verify what had actually happened. Ramses lied through his teeth to his people in Egypt that he had defeated the Hittites at Kadesh. Actually, he almost lost his army and had to sign a non-aggression pact. The same thing with all this talk about what's going on at the polar ice caps. They're hoping that you, the individual human being, does not have the resources to go up there and check for yourselves. And there have been all these embarrassments where they send these ships up there to study the melting ice caps and they get stuck in the ice. The polar bears are going extinct. Actually, no. They've expanded in population to where they're pest animals. They're going to start allowing hunting of them again. Latest word we get is that Donald Trump is keeping another of his campaign promises. He is pulling the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement. And apparently over at the EPA, they're trying to decide whether this is going to be a hard pullout or a soft pullout. The soft pullout would be a formal withdrawal, would take 3 years, or they may just yank the plug right now. And of course, all the liberals are out there screaming and crying that Donald Trump has doomed the Earth to eventual extinction. Well, the Earth's going to go extinct eventually. At some point, the sun is going to start burning into the higher atomic fuels, and it will expand into a red giant. And it will swallow Mercury and Venus and certainly roast the Earth, if not destroy it. And if humans are still around, they're going to be out there on Mars working on their suntan. But to be very honest, given how far off that is, I seriously doubt humans will still be here. Because evolution hasn't stopped with the human race. We may imagine ourselves the pinnacle of evolution. But eventually something's going to come along that's going to be smarter, more agile, stronger. may decide humans taste very good. Or there may be another Chicxulub asteroid that just reshuffles the evolutionary deck. Or we could do something really stupid and drive ourselves into extinction. Global nuclear war. A mistake with all this GMO food. A bad mistake with these forced mandatory vaccinations. A new natural pandemic. Supervolcano eruption. We're not going to be here forever. That's just a hard reality you all need to be taking a look at. So we have to take care of ourselves and our loved ones right now. And where we can actually try and fend off a potential extinction level event like global nuclear war, that's where we focus our efforts. Now then, as you know, the Dakota Access Pipeline is already under severe criticism because after all of that pushback against the Lakota people who were concerned about pipeline leaks, poisoning their land, poisoning the water, not just for the reservation but downstream, it turns out the pipeline is leaking in multiple locations, and it's not even running at full capacity yet. We're now finding out that the company behind the Dakota Access Pipeline actually hired anti-terror consultants to try and undermine and destabilize the protesters whose land the pipeline was going over in violation of treaty. Now, it turns out up in the University of Calgary, a pair of researchers have designed a new type of oil pipeline. And they're saying their system involves both real-time monitoring and an outer protective layer around the pipeline to protect the environment. The problem is it costs more than the current approach. So we are not likely to see it brought into widespread usage. It's cheaper to build a cheap pipeline and hire public relations firms to deal with the leaks than it is to actually make a pipeline that isn't going to leak in the first place. And this gets back to something I've said many, many times before. These technologies can be made to work. Oil pipelines, nuclear reactors, whatever. But you cannot leave the safety decisions in the hands of the money junkies because they'll always cut the safety systems to maximize profitability. Inevitably, it happens. I think the perfect illustration of that would be Fukushima. Because just down the coast from Fukushima, there was another nuclear power station at Onagawa. And its design engineer stood firm and said, we are putting in the full safety systems. I don't care what it costs. And Onagawa was the only one of those power stations that came through the quake and tsunami unscathed. All the others were damaged, Fukushima being the worst. Now, here is a really bizarre story, and it shows just how over the top government has become. This is coming out of Redding.com. And apparently out in Tehama County, there was a farmer who has been arrested. He's facing trial in federal court and a $2.8 million fine for failing to get a permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to plow his own field and plant wheat. And this is absurd. Being a farm kid myself, I mean, if you had fields out in back of your house, you could do whatever you wanted with them. You could plow them, you could irrigate them, you could plant food on them. And now we have this farmer, $2.8 million fine because he didn't get a permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to grow food on his own land. I think that is absolutely unacceptable. Is this a concerted effort to prevent small farmers from growing food on their own farms? Create a monopoly of large corporate farms as the only supplier of food? Amazing. Now, if you are my age, you probably remember the joy of the circus. And when I was a kid, I went to the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. 3-ring circus, biggest in the business. Went down and saw it at Boston Garden. And sadly, they are now shutting down. They're out of business. The issue, of course, was coming from PETA that was concerned about the treatment of the animals in the traveling circus. Now, I actually got to hang out with some of the Ringling Brothers circus people when I was working on the Queen Mary in Long Beach, because the circus came on in, and the circus people, when they weren't working, were coming over to the Queen Mary to take the tour and watch the magic show, and I got to hang out with them. Those circus people understood those animals were a big part of their business, and they did take care of them. They were probably better cared for than you would find in most zoos. Modern zoos are a lot better. I remember the original Los Angeles Zoo in Griffith Park. That was pretty gritty, and I was very glad when they overhauled it. Made it much kinder for the animals. But apparently the entire circus has decided that they're going to shut down, which is a shame because even without the animals, you still have the acrobats, the high wire acts. And maybe in this day and age of TV, people don't feel they need to go and witness that first person. But I think that's a bit of a loss. Because when you're looking at something on a TV screen, you're not really there. You're not experiencing the moment. And again, it's another iconic American entity that is fading into history. Now, here in Hawaii, as I mentioned yesterday, we've got this mysterious mass die-off of animals turning some of our beaches pink. One of the things they're getting ready to do here is they're very concerned about all the sunscreens that are sold to the tourists, and the tourists will slather it all over them, and they'll go swimming, especially snorkeling on the reefs. And they're beginning to realize that a lot of the chemicals in those sunscreens are not only bad for the people wearing them, they're bad for the coral reef life itself. And that may be explaining some of the die-offs that we're seeing. So State Senator Will Espero is proposing a new bill that will outlaw the sale of sunscreens that contain certain known toxic chemicals, octinoxate and oxybenzone, which seem to be responsible for many of the problems coral reefs are currently facing. And apparently when you swim, the stuff comes off, goes into the coral reef. And this would be a really, really good idea because our reefs are a big part of our tourism industry. We can't let them die. And I have seen amazingly alive reefs down in Fiji, and I have seen what overdeveloped, over-touristed reefs can look like over in Barbados. And it was just nothing but gray and a couple of fish. So I think it's a really good idea. And that maybe we ought to start looking at toxic chemicals, not just in sunscreen, but everything we put on our bodies, and then flush down that shower drain. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here. And stepping on back to the economy and all this talk about a cashless society, cashless that. It's all for the convenience of the bankers. And it poses risks to the rest of us. And that's illustrated by an email I just now got from somebody who was at the supermarket doing their shopping, and all of a sudden the debit card machine went dead for the entire store. Nobody could purchase their food with a credit card or a debit card or even the EBT cards. The only thing that would work was cash. And that's something to keep in mind. When they push for a cash-free society, they cannot guarantee those machines are going to work all the time, especially with all the hacking that's going on right now. Now, when I was young and reckless, I used to like to spend a lot of time in the mountains, and I did a little low-key climbing. I'm not the big rappel up to the top and everything. Highest peak I've been on is a 14,000. And apparently, they're just now confirming over on Mount Everest, the Hillary Step has collapsed. Now, for those of you who know the history of Mount Everest and Sir Edmund Hillary, you remember when Hillary Clinton said she was named for Sir Edmund Hillary, and then it turned out she was already 6 years old when Sir Edmund Hillary crested Mount Everest. And that was a big thing back then. It was like when Armstrong stepped on the moon. Wow, he hit the top of, the great age of exploration. We got to the North Pole, we got to the South Pole, we got to the top Everest. And there was this feature near the peak of Everest called the Hillary Step, and it was thought to have been damaged in Nepal's 2015 earthquake. And apparently following that quake, because the side of the mountain is now considered very unstable, they haven't had a lot of people up there. And there's been a lot of snow cover. But apparently British mountaineer Tim Mosadale has confirmed the Hillary Step has collapsed. He reached the summit, and he came on back and said, yeah, it's just not there anymore. I remember when the Old Man of the Mountain in New Hampshire came on down. That was something we used to go see all the time. Now, NASA is reporting that there is a man-made bubble around Earth, basically created of protons and electrons and ions created by VLF and ELF radio. They're interacting with particles in space, changing how they move. And so now there's a new Van Allen radiation belt that is the result of these interactions with these radio transmitters. Finally, there's a new research out saying the number of atheists in America could be 10 times more than previous estimates. There is now what is being considered a shocking decline in people who no longer believe in the gods or God or giant muffin or flying spaghetti monster here. Meanwhile, over in Spain, you remember the big stink they had in Britain with all of these church-run homes for unwed mothers and how they were abusing the babies, selling the babies. Apparently, they've got another one emerging in Spain, where the Catholic Church is finally handing over their documents, what they were doing there. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here. We will be back tomorrow, Thursday, here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. We're in a crisis time in the history, not just of the United States, but of the entire world. So do what you can to help get the word out. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.